The Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to John. Glory to you, Lord Christ. Pilate entered the headquarters again, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priests have handed you over to me. What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not from this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." Pilate asked him, "So you are a king?" Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. For this I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
In the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be right. I'm bound to say, after I read that part of the Gospel of John, after Jesus has been arrested, the Jews did not kill Jesus. The Romans killed Jesus. The imperial power of Rome executed Jesus. The Jews didn't. Now, I'm grateful for a conversation I had with Sharon at coffee hour last Sunday. Thank you for that, Sharon. It's been with me all week. And as it happens, it's formed the foundation of this morning's words to you on this last Sunday of Pentecost. And so today I invite you to open your imagination and let it touch your hearts. Open your imagination and let it touch your hearts. After dinner last night, Catherine was up watching the Arizona State, Oregon State football game, and I was down on the front porch rocking on the rocking chair, and the moon was just rising above our oak tree. And I looked at the moon, and just to my right of the moon, there was a small star, and there's an app for that. I have an app. It's called Star Trek. It's not Star Trek. Star something. And you put it up in the sky, and you put the circle around it. It tells you what the star or planet is. So I looked at the moon, and it turned out to be Aldebaran. It was a star, Aldebaran. And there was the light from the moon reflected off the sun, and then the light from Aldebaran. And so I Googled Aldebaran. It's 65 light years away. Now, it takes 1.2 seconds for the light from the moon to get to Earth. And it takes 65 years for the light from that star to reach our eyes. 65 years. I was in 3rd grade in Miss Coolidge's class at Van Meter School in Los Gatos when the light that reflected in my eye was created. And I sat there. The vastness, there was a Eucharistic prayer, the vastness of interstellar space. 65 years for that light to reach my eyes. And my imagination went wild. So I ask you to use imagination and let it touch your heart today. It's the last Sunday of Pentecost, the liturgical season, which began in Advent last year and is now concluded and will start again next week. So it's a time of beginnings and endings. So it makes good sense to think about beginnings and endings. I'm thinking of Frank Sinatra's song, "It Was a Very Good Week." 17, it was a very good year. I'm not sure 17 was a very good year for me, but there's something about looking back on it with as we grow older, that 17 seems we had all our faculties and there was a lot going on and there was our whole life ahead of us. It seemed like a very good year. And then the song continues, and at the end of the song, the Sinatra is an old man looking back on his life, and it's about time for him to have his life ended. That whole arc of his life. And we tend to do that. We say, well, you know, when we're young, we're in the springtime of our lives, and then we move into the summer where there's all kinds of activity going on, and we have our life is meaningful, and then it gets to the end of the summer, and then we come into the fall, and we start to lose our faculties, kind of like the trees losing their leaves, and then by about this time of the year, it's time for death. And that's kind of the routine that we see with our lives. Well, this morning I'm going to ask you to use your imaginations, because I had an experience several years ago now that opened up my imagination, and I see life in a very different way. I was in my office at St. Mary's, and someone called me and said, would you please come up to Chomp, because my wife is in labor. Now, Chomp is the community hospital of the Monterey Peninsula, and it's called Chomp. So I drove up to Chomp, and it's up the hill. It's up the highway, the top of the hill. It's up on Carmel Hill. So I drove up to Chomp, and I went to the maternity ward, and I visited Kelly and her husband. And Kelly had been in labor for several hours. And she said, I just like prayers. Right? We talked for a while. I laid my hands on her and said the prayer. And as I took my hands off, Kelly said, it's time. And her husband said, Padre, those are powerful prayers. and so I said goodbye. And it so happened that at another place in the hospital, there was someone who was actively dying. And there'd been a vigil for him. Folks had been with me and his wife over several days by now. And so I said, well, as long as I'm here, I'll go down and see how things are progressing. So I went to that room and came in, and the woman looked at me and said, I'm so glad you came, Richard. It's time. And so we went to the bedside, and he was the laboring his breathing. And then as John Ben said a couple of weeks ago, he took his last breath, and the breath went out of him, and he passed. And I waited for a while, and we said the commendatory prayers. It's called last rites. We say those prayers over the body. And I left, and as I was going down the hall, and I was thinking about this experience, and the first thing that struck me was it's such a privilege to be with people at birth and at passing. And it's a humbling experience, very humbling experience to do that, particularly within a half an hour of the event. So I got in my car, and I came out of the parking lot and came down Carmel Hill into Pacific Grove. And when you get to down to the Pacific Grove limits, there's a stop sign, and there's a Safeway on one side and the traffic light. So I stopped at the traffic light, and from there you can see Monterey Bay. And we call it, that day was a Davenport day. And today was a Davenport moment when we drove in. And that means that from the top of Carmel Hill, it's so clear, it seems like you see all the way to Davenport. And it was that way this morning we were coming down Highway 1. It was so clear we could almost see Davenport. We might start calling that a Ben moment. This could have started over there. It was a glorious day, and I sat there and I looked out at the bay, and I said out loud, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. And then I went back to church, parked the car, and then I just started to walk along the rec trail. It was the same thing. And it occurred to me that birth and death are not two sides of the same coin. Birth and death are the same thing. The same thing. And so I ask you to open your imagination. Open your imagination. All of us, even Jesus, was created in the womb. And we were created and we grew in our mother's womb. And we had everything that we needed for life. And we grew and we were formed. And if we had a consciousness, we couldn't imagine anything outside the womb. Everything we had was there. Life was pretty good. But then a moment came when it was time to leave the womb. And we did. And some of us left it kicking and screaming because we were very happy to be where we were. And then we came into this existence. And wow. Kathy and I were at the local on Wednesday, and a couple came in with a little girl who was probably 3 months old, 4 months old, and he had his daughter on the shoulder. And I looked at her, and her eyes were like saucers. And she was looking around. You've probably seen this with children. And she was looking around, and just this sense of, oh, wow. And soaking all this information in, filling herself with the awe of what she saw. I'd ask you to use your imaginations. What if we came out of the wombs of our mother into the womb of creation? It's very much like being in the womb of our mother. We call it Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth. Can we imagine being in the womb of Mother Earth? Just take a moment to think about it. If we are in the womb of Mother Earth, we have all these other folks around us who are also in the same womb. Our grandchildren are twins, and they were in the womb together, and they're in their 20 now, but they're still joined together. They don't get too far apart from each other. And so we're in this womb with all these other folks. We've got air and wind and water and food and sunlight and all of those things. And if we see the world like we did when we were 3 months old, and just majesty of this womb in which we live. And we grow and we mature, and hopefully we mature spiritually and find out what it means to be human, what it means, what we're destined to be, what we were created to be. And then at some moment, it's time to leave the womb. Just like we left our mother's womb, it's time to leave the womb. And some of us go kicking and screaming, and some of us gently pass into the room, out of the womb. And just like being in our mother's womb, we had no conception, no conception of what it meant to be here. The same situation. When we leave this womb, we can't even begin to conceive of what's on the other side. We've tried for 1,000 years, longer than that, with stories and the streets of heaven are paved with gold, and all of these things. We use our imagination and hope, but we can't conceive what's outside of this womb. All we can do is trust. Trust that the God who created all of this still in that God's will. So hope, use your imagination. As you do that, have it touch your heart and give you hope in the sense that when we leave this room, there's something else out there, just like the first womb we left, but entirely different.